Time is a master worker that heals the wounds of temporary defeat and equalizes the inequalities and rights the wrong of the world. There is nothing impossible with time. Hello from me, Roshni Gadja.
And hi, I'm Diane.
Welcome to episode 5 of DragonFly Vibe today. And today, Diane, I was saying to you that the theme that's come up for me over the last week is pretty interesting. I picked up a message that a friend who's actually quite a positivity coach put out on Instagram. And he shared quite a personal story about his relationship, what happened last year. And he was saying for someone who speaks to thousands of people around the world and inspires positivity, what eventually happened was he put across an argument in such a hard tone, meaning he was completely convinced that what he was saying is right. And it was about a better world and doing things for good. That perhaps that forcefulness is what hurt most and impacted his relationship. And I didn't think too much of it. It's, of course, a personal story. So I didn't analyze it. But what immediately came up is what someone said to me a few years back that struck me quite strongly, is that, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And when I sent that message across to him, something shifted for him. And he looked at the situation in quite a different sense. And as the week progressed, I've actually had an interesting situation with a client where the work is quite complex and the administrative process, which is quite important in the work I do, didn't flow as smoothly as possible, which meant that I was working 17, 18 hours a day just on this administration. We haven't even gotten to the work yet. And I could have gotten angry. I could have become bitter. I could have taken the legal route. But I said, hang on a second. I took on this assignment because there is something bigger. And the same message popped up. Do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And I chose a happy client. So we harmoniously worked out this process. And this morning, finally, we're at the final stages of that. So I thought I'd position that because I think, this may be something that people out there are dealing with in different ways, different examples. But how does that strike you?
Well, ego can be a very challenging thing. And some will say that we need ego to survive. But through the work that I've done, ego actually suffocates the soul because it raises its head and it seems to fight endlessly to make a point. And some battles are worth it and some battles are not worth it. So a question I often like to say to people is, does the outcome really matter? And if it doesn't, then let it go. If it does, well, then that's an individual choice. So ego is something that challenges, I think, everybody at different times in their lives. And one thing I have realized is there's always something to learn. Nobody knows everything about everything. There's always something you don't know something about. And there are things you don't even know you don't know you don't know. So ego often plays a part and it goes deeper to a self-knowing again. Because when you know yourself and you trust yourself, there's no need to prove yourself to anything or anyone.
So you've said something that probably helps us think about this in a more mindful way. The first is you've got to know yourself. And I think that's the role that ego plays in our lives, right? So if we didn't have an ego of a positive, healthy nature, then we possibly could not be standing within our power or knowing our identity or being authentic even. But then you can take that to another level. Once you know who you are and what your power is, how do you apply it in the world? Do you apply it in a way that you want to control more and you want more power? Or do you use that power in a way that influences and inspires something different?
Well, you're always going to have people that agree with you, and you're always going to have people that disagree with you, and you're going to have people that don't actually care either way. So knowing yourself is knowing also when to step forward and stand for something. And that goes to what you stand for and what you represent in the world. And that can change because, for example, today you can stand for support of others. And that can bring you being of service to a lot of people, which doesn't fulfill you necessarily in other things. So that what you stand for can shift and change at any point in your life. And when you growing and learning and willing to shift yourself on all levels, the standing for certain things and the allowing and letting go of certain things shifts also. So it's a continual change and this fluid aspect of stepping into a different level, different vibration as you grow within yourself.
So the vision I'm getting, or the image I'm getting, is if ego is in balance, then like the scales, it will be in balance. The moment you apply ego for a different purpose that tops that balance, either way, you could either go into victim mode, or you could go into, let's call it dictator mode. And it's all about self-awareness. So from the work you do, and by the kind of resonance that you can identify, what types of emotions can we link with a healthy ego? So if we're in a situation and we could approach it or respond in two different ways. We could either fight the situation because we want to show that we're standing in our power, or you could say, okay, I am actually focused on the end goal, the outcome, the purpose why I'm here. So let me approach it in a more fluid way, in a more collaborative way, choose the word. But from an emotional perspective and self-awareness, how can we recognize the status of the ego and how we're applying it if we use the language of emotions?
Well, we go through all the cycles at different stages in our life. So being forceful and pushing a point through and getting a result that you want, surrendering and allowing yourself to be used or being a victim, self-pity, of not getting something right or actually not knowing something. There's another example of ego, well, feeling sorry for yourself because you didn't have knowledge that you thought you had. So I can't say it is one thing. It's different things at different stages, but anger will definitely fall into the solar plexus area. It's all the power aspects of that energy. So there are 15 to 20 levels of our power, and the aggressive form of anger, the violent form of anger will be the lowest, and the allowing and acceptance, those levels will be the higher levels. So you filter through different levels, and it all depends on your soul at what you've chosen to look at. Some people have come to look and grow in the emotion, anger, resentment, self-pity, victim. Others have chosen to come learn about love or fear. So depending on the soul and the levels and the lessons you've chosen to look at, you will relate to certain things more than others. So those more or less should give you an idea. It's the power issues. It's all to do with control or lack of control. And again, there's 15 to 20 levels of that. The polarities of both sides of those emotions.
So Diane, even in economics, they use the term economic equilibrium, right? Everything tries to find a middle ground or a balance point. And listening to you speak, I was wondering, in the space of a situation and emotions, is it a case when we're dealing with egos and let's say the sphere of emotions, that if one person applies one type of ego reaction, then the other person, in order to neutralize it, ideally should be aware of what is playing out and try to apply an approach that's neutral. And while I'm saying that, I'm obviously seeing the glass half full, where one person is using it in an undesired manner, and so the other person could easily help to pacify the situation. However, it also could work the other way around. So I'm thinking out aloud here, Diane. Help me through this.
Well, that's a good example, but it's again maybe a glass half full. For example, if you've there was just an example this week. Somebody actually messaged me and they had a situation, an issue with a client of theirs, and the client was actually trying to get their forcefulness through, and they were trying to control and dictate. And this particular person was trying to set some boundaries and trying to instill a self-respect and self-value, which the other one wasn't. And my message to her was, as much as you wanting to affirm they must and will respect me, I said, you don't have that control over somebody else's energy. So you cannot force someone to value, respect, and honor you. You can only do that for yourself. And that is when she instilled stronger boundaries and made a choice of cutting the tie with this particular person.
So Diane, as you were, giving us an overview a little bit earlier, I couldn't help but see the faces of Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu in front of me, and the South African story, where ego and anger and negative emotion and bitterness could have held an entire nation back. That for me is a beautiful metaphor of how to raise your head above the situation and use perhaps the power of love, the power of a better vision to pull you out of a situation that could have gotten really nasty. If you consider what happened in South Africa close to 30 years back now, to bring us to where we are now, what types of lessons can we learn from that bigger picture and apply it in our day-to-day lives and the types of conflicts we also come up with?
Well, it's an individual choice. So you're going to have people that look at that scenario from a different perspective. It's like looking at a looking glass and seeing it from 10 different views. So you're going to have some that see the positives, you're going to see some that see the negatives. It all depends on your conscious awareness of where you are from a spiritual understanding of life, respect, honor, gratitude, self-love, and love for others. So it's an individual aspect of your conscious mind, of where your conscious mind is, your conscious awareness to the greatness of where we can take this even further. Just from South Africa, we can take it into the world. Where do you feel that the world has either gone wrong, can learn some lessons. Remember, you can learn from everything. And I've said this before, that nothing is wasted. There will be mistakes in that, and there will be mistakes in where we are now. But the ego will come in and maybe try and say, okay, that person was wrong, or that environment was wrong, and this is right. The point to get to is, well, proving who's right or wrong is not really going to get anybody anywhere. It's just going to keep the status quo of what it is. So if you have a different attitude and say, well, what can we learn from that, and what can we learn from this? It's a trial and error. We know we don't want things to be the way they were globally. And we don't know where we want to go because we haven't got there yet. But we keep on trying different things to see what's worked and what hasn't worked. And you're going to find things that you try in the future that will not work. And it's okay. It's to say to ourselves, well, let's just try it and see how it turns out. If it isn't successful for the greater good of everything and all things, well, maybe we need to acknowledge that. It's the acknowledgement of failure that I think a lot of people struggle with. The acknowledgement of something that didn't actually work. I think that's when ego becomes the bigger problem in moving forward and allowing yourself to learn from the situation as opposed to getting stuck in the situation.
Well, it's interesting because those situations, when things don't go as planned or they go wrong, if you want to call it that, it shows up what you didn't know before. So it goes back to what you were saying earlier. You know, what you don't know, you don't know. And so when that plays out, it almost shows up your vulnerability. It shows up kind of in the work environment or in our day-to-day spaces as if you didn't think about it or you didn't do your due diligence, as it were. But as you say, you've got to be kind to yourself. And context matters.
You've got to know that you don't know everything. You've got to accept that within yourself and within everybody else. Yes, people will have skills and talents in different things, but you don't have everything. Your parents didn't have everything. They couldn't give you everything. And there isn't enough time in our one lifetime to learn everything. And if we lived 20 lifetimes, we still don't know everything because it's an ongoing process. We shift. Each body we enter, each vehicle we're in gives us a completely different experience. So our conscious awareness shifts to a different dynamic because we're having a different experience. Let's say you are in a healthy body in one experience and another one in not such a healthy body. Well, that will change your perception around struggles and health. So it's where the soul has its experience and shifts its conscious level of awareness and has a perception of what the world relates to, is about on a much bigger level and not just in the small scale of where we are today.
So Diane, when those things we don't know or we don't understand the information or it hasn't come into our sphere of information yet, you know, that picture of the iceberg where you're seeing the tip of it above the water and the rest is below the water that you are not seeing. So if that which you are seeing in the world, your personality, your character, is reflected in the ego, the I am, if we take a step back from looking at the ego as in a healthy state or perhaps an unhealthy state, what then should we be moving into from a state of ego-driven action to what is the polarity?
Well,
what is the next level?
It's getting in touch with your higher self. Your lower self, the human self, all the challenges of the third dimension, the 3D, the physical, the tangible stuff that we are in, That's relating to your lower self, which is about survival and self. And when you get in touch with the higher aspect of yourself, your higher wisdom, your higher knowing, you can bring that information into the physical and use the physical in a better way. So instead of having a reaction, you can have a response because there's a higher knowing of something. So that alignment between higher self and lower self. Most people think they are just the vehicle, the body. They don't realize that they are not the vehicle. They are a divine being that's using this vehicle to have an experience. So the human body and the human brain is not who they are from a higher perspective. And when we start aligning with that higher self, it just changes the way one perceives existence here and the way one reacts and responds to things here.
I can't help link now your overview of ego to value. So back to that picture of the iceberg I was illustrating. When more parts of you that you didn't see or know before show up, that means your identity has changed, in inverted commas, by that much. And therefore, who you are, how people know you, the environment you're in, something's going to shift. And I find that when those aspects come to your awareness, there's almost a moment or a few days or a few months where you don't want to admit what's come to your awareness because you almost have to recalibrate your value or where you stand in the context of your life. So, Diane, what can you tell us about how you see yourself and how you link your own self-worth or value to that?
Me personally.
In the general context.
One would have to have a process. One would have to have a technique that works for each individual uniquely. There are techniques that work for a big portion of society, and those techniques won't necessarily work for everybody. Meditation is one fantastic tool. And I've heard people say to me, well, I can't do that. I can't switch the mind off. So they do something else. But that's fine. It's not wrong or right. There isn't one set of rules or one road for everybody. It's the most important thing is to get in touch with yourself from a deeper perspective. And one thing that seems to be common thread is to quieten the mind down. Because the mind it's very active. I use the term, the mind runs at 1,000 kilometers an hour. How does anything else get in there if the mind is so busy? So to quieten the mind down, to slow it down, is a very good starting point. And when you can quieten that mind down and get some gaps and spaces in between, well, that's when the insights and the epiphanies come through. I'll give you an example. This week, I was having a conversation with somebody, and they had done quite a few modalities in life. And I asked them a question. The last one that they did, they got themselves into financial pressure. Okay. So I'd asked them a question. I said to them, what was your motive for doing this modality? What was your drive? And they sat and they thought about it. And I said, you need to dig deep here and try and find the truth, the awareness. They hadn't asked themselves that question. And they came back to me and they said, the recognition. They want to be recognized. So I said, right, ego. That's the most important thing. So we started looking at deeper reasons why that is more important than anything else. It wasn't the money, it wasn't facilitating others, it was recognition. When we had a look at why, there wasn't a lot of stimulation from the family's history of achievements. So because that was the foundation that they were brought up in, that became a very important thing for them. So the recognition of the achievements of getting the modalities and having as much knowledge was extremely important for them. So they became aware of that for themselves. So they saw themselves in a different light. And I said, now the key is not to judge yourself in anything. It's neither wrong nor right. It's just an awareness of what the drive is. So before they actually move on to another modality and get themselves into more financial trouble, know what the drive is and why it's so important to have the recognition. And as they sit and settle with that with themselves, they'll probably start asking, well, actually, do I really need that as much as I did in the past? Which might give them a different choice in the future.
That is so interesting. And you've used a case study, but I think we've all gone through it. And the first kind of example that comes to my mind is, you know, when you're at school, you're looking for these awards and accolades and wanting to fit into your peer group. And we still do that, I think, as adults, wanting to fit into a peer group. And then, you know, to kind of find your feet in your identity and to get the recognition from other people, we aspire to get different academic qualifications, different job titles, different cars, live in certain houses, be seen to be someone of value and worth in the eyes of other people. And you know, it's not right or wrong, as you say, but it brings me to what Simon Sinek says: know your why. Why are you doing it? Like in your example, the person clearly recognized after you facilitated the conversation that it's about recognition. For other people, it could be something else.
Correct.
But your important point is that it's neither right or wrong. The awareness is good enough.
And also remember, with that recognition, that became more important than anything else. So when you accept and value yourself for who and what you are, your failures and your successes, knowing what you need to develop in yourself and not overachieve something because you're wanting external validation. When you're looking for that external validation, there's a lack of love and acceptance within oneself. And I've used this before. Visualize a tree. If you are the tree and your roots is what holds you, if you've developed roots in one thing or two things, and suddenly trauma or something comes along in your life and hits you really hard, that tree is going to fall over. It's not going to hold up that well. So we have to develop ourselves in many things to know that we are grounded and have lack of fear, because fear is in that base area. Okay, so when there's fear, one doesn't trust oneself. And that could be one particular person's path. Fear will be predominant in their lives because they haven't developed a sense of self and a self-knowing and a self-trust and a self-value and a self-love. So they will fumble and fall through different things in life until they develop enough within themselves to know, this is what I'm good at, this is what I need help in, this is what I'll try on my own, but I might still fail, but it's okay.
Yeah, Diane, going through what we all have in the last year, 18 months, I think many people I've spoken to in life and in business have seen themselves in a different way. People are changing professions, they're changing cities, they're changing their relationships. They're really seeing themselves as someone they perhaps didn't recognize before. And as exciting as it can be for those of us who embrace change, it is also daunting. And change does bring up fear. So before we close today, for our listeners who may be in that space with the examples we've given or something more personal to them, what can we leave them with this weekend?
Well, as I said before, remember, you're not your body and you're not your brain, you're a divine being. Now, soul may be pushing you and pushing the discomfort and the growth. Because if the soul is here to grow and learn, it's going to bring up uncomfortable environments and situations and circumstances. That's the higher self. It wants to develop, it wants to grow. So it's uncomfortable in the physical dimension. Well, you grow through challenges. So it could be coming from your higher self. So what I would suggest is, if it's coming from your higher self, best to get in touch with your higher self so you can move more easily and not resist it as much.
Thanks, Diane. So, earlier when I met you, I said a burning question in my mind has been, and I have to ask you this, when we go down the spiritual path or spiritual awareness, it seems like one becomes quite serious and aloof from the day-to-day life. Is it that way? Or can we be a bit more curious and can it be a fun process?
You can approach anything the way you want to. With the work that I've done in the past and my sessions and my regressions, the way it actually unfolded was the phone call that I made was, well, let's just have some fun here. Let's just see where this goes. So when you're open and willing to actually just allow things to unfold, yes, some moments can be uncomfortable, but you can also say, all right, I know this is a learning experience, so let's just see where it goes. I think it boils down to attitude. It boils down to your attitude of approach of, do you want to approach this as work, 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 or do you want to approach this as, let's just find out who and what I am?
Thanks, Diane. And I thought it's important to kind of leave our listeners and ourselves on a lighter note because there's a general heaviness all around, and we actually don't need more work, but we need to become more comfortable in exploring who we are so that over time, which is where we started, we can become our best selves. So Diane, thank you very much. And listeners, thank you. We've seen that over the past few weeks and months, you've been listening to our podcast and I hope appreciating it. And we really appreciate every single one of you. It makes our conversations that much more meaningful, knowing that we're sharing it with people who resonate with what we have to say. So till the next time, take care.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.